was Christmas Eve, a night of joy and celebration. The streets were blanketed in snow, the houses adorned with twinkling lights, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of bells filled the air with a magical charm. Inside my home, the Christmas party was in full swing. Gifts were piling up beneath the tree. My siblings' laughter echoed through the cozy room, and my parents were busy arranging desserts under the soft glow of candles. Yet, amidst all this cheer, an unsettling feeling tugged at me, a strange restlessness that I couldn't explain, as if something dark lurked behind the festive atmosphere. Without saying a word, I stepped away from the party. I left the warm, vibrant lights of the house behind and ventured out into the cold, silent night. My feet carried me toward the edge of the town, where an old, abandoned mansion stood. I didn't know why I felt drawn to it, but it was as if an invisible force was pulling me there, guiding my every step. The crisp snow crunched beneath my boots, and with each step closer, the chill in the air seemed to deepen, biting into my skin. The mansion loomed before me like a forgotten relic, its broken windows and decaying walls a stark contrast to the joyous celebrations happening elsewhere. Yet tonight, something was different. A faint glow flickered through the cracks of the boarded windows, and I could hear muffled voices, soft, almost cheerful, like a gathering was taking place. My heart pounded in my chest, but my curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I pushed forward, my breath visible in the icy air, until I reached the heavy wooden door. I hesitated for a moment before placing my hand on the rusted handle. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing the inside of the mansion. My breath caught in my throat. The scene before me was impossible. The mansion's interior mirrored the Christmas party I had just left at home. The same shimmering Christmas tree stood in the corner, draped with glistening ornaments. The same warm lights danced across the walls, and the same festive decorations adorned the room. But the most chilling part was the people. They weren't strangers. They looked exactly like my family. My siblings were there, laughing and exchanging gifts, and my parents stood by the fireplace, smiling warmly. Yet something was off. Their movements were too precise, their smiles too wide, and their eyes felt hollow, like they were gazing through me rather than at me. I froze in the doorway, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. How could they be here when I had just left them at home? The cold air from outside brushed past me, but it was nothing compared to the icy dread creeping into my chest. And then, as if they suddenly became aware of my presence, every single head in the room turned toward me in unison. Their smiles widened unnaturally, and my heart sank. For a moment, I couldn't move. Their faces were eerily familiar, but something about them was profoundly wrong. The family in front of me wasn't mine, even though they looked identical. Their movements were mechanical, their smiles stretched too wide, and their eyes, glassy and lifeless, felt like they could pierce through my soul. A sudden, cold gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, making me jump. The sound echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. I instinctively turned back to the door and gripped the handle, trying to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the house itself wanted me trapped. When I turned back to the room, the family was gone. The decorations remained. The tree, the lights, the garlands, but the room now felt suffocatingly empty. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. "Hello." My voice came out shaky, barely louder than a whisper. A faint giggle echoed through the hall, followed by the soft patter of footsteps. My chest tightened as I spun around, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The footsteps were light, like a child running, but they seemed to come from every direction at once. I stepped further into the room, my breath shallow and quick. The closer I got to the Christmas tree, the more the air seemed to grow colder, heavier. A strange smell lingered, something metallic, like old blood. Then I saw it. A small box, wrapped in red paper, sat neatly under the tree. Unlike the other presents, this one had my name written on it in bold black letters. My hands trembled as I bent down, and picked it up. The box felt unnervingly warm, as though it had been sitting by a fire. Slowly, I unwrapped it, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Inside was a Polaroid picture. It was me. I was standing in this very room, frozen mid-step, staring into the camera with a terrified expression. But what truly made my blood run cold was the shadowy figure standing behind me in the photo, its face obscured, but its long, bony fingers resting on my shoulder. A loud thud from upstairs jolted me out of my shock. My head snapped upward, and I felt my knees go weak. Something was moving above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps creaked across the floorboards, each step sending a jolt of fear down my spine. I wanted to run, but my feet refused to move. As the footsteps grew louder, the Christmas lights flickered, casting the room into brief moments of darkness. And in each flash of light, I saw something in the corner of the room. A dark figure, hunched and still, watching me. The lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. My breath hitched as I fumbled for my phone, using its dim flashlight to scan the room. And then, a voice. "Why did you leave us?" It was soft, broken, and hauntingly familiar. My stomach dropped as I realized it was my mother's voice, but warped, hollow, and dripping with malice. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, my voice trembling. "You're not real. This isn't real." The voice came again, closer this time. "You left us behind. And now, you'll stay." Suddenly, the room erupted with sound, laughter, whispers, and the faint tune of a Christmas carol playing on a warped, scratchy record. The decorations on the walls began to shake violently, the ornaments shattering one by one. And then I saw them again. My family stood at the far end of the room, their smiles grotesquely wide, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Slowly, they began to walk toward me, their movements unnaturally stiff and jerky. Panicked, I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering as I tried to find a way out, but every door, every window was gone. It was as though the house had sealed itself, trapping me inside its twisted reality. Just as their outstretched hands reached for me, I felt the floor beneath me give way. With a loud crash, I fell through the rotting wood into the cold, dark basement below. My head throbbed from the impact, and as I struggled to stand, I heard a new sound, slow, raspy breathing coming from the shadows. I wasn't alone. The basement was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything, even the faint beam of my phone's flashlight. I groaned, feeling a sharp pain in my ankle as I tried to stand. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst. The air down here was heavier, colder, each breath like inhaling ice. That breathing. It was still there, slow, wet, and rasping, like something ancient and decayed. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking. My own words echoed back at me, distorted, almost mocking. The flashlight flickered weakly, casting brief, jittery glimpses of the room. Broken furniture, rusted chains, and claw marks on the stone walls. Deep, jagged lines as though something had tried, desperately, to escape. The breathing grew louder, closer. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound and froze. In the far corner of the room, hunched in the shadows, was something wrong. It was humanoid, but only barely. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and stretched thin like wax. Its head cocked to the side as if studying me, and its sunken eyes glinted faintly in the dim light. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It moved closer, the sound of its limbs scraping against the cold floor sending chills down my spine. And then it spoke. "Welcome home," it rasped, its voice a grotesque blend of my father's and my own. My legs finally obeyed, and I stumbled backward, tripping over debris. The creature tilted its head again, amused, and then it lunged. I screamed and scrambled to my feet, running blindly into the darkness. My flashlight died completely, leaving me alone in the black void. My hands groped for anything. A wall, a door, but all I found was emptiness. A sudden icy grip closed around my wrist. I shrieked, yanking my arm free and turning to run, but I collided with something solid. Light suddenly flooded the room, blinding and unnatural. I shielded my eyes, and when I lowered my arm, I was back in the living room of the mansion. Everything was as it had been, calm, festive, and warm. My family sat around the tree, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. "Come sit with us," my mother said, her voice soft and inviting. My heart hammered in my chest as I took a hesitant step forward. Was it over? Had I imagined everything? But then I saw it, in the reflection of the mirror above the fireplace. Behind me, the creature loomed, its grotesque face inches from mine, its empty eyes staring directly at me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, only the smiling faces of my family. "You belong here now," my father said, his voice dripping with finality. The walls began to close in, the room shrinking and warping. The Christmas lights flickered violently, their warm glow turning a sickly green. My family stood up, their bodies twisting unnaturally as they began to approach me. "No," I screamed, backing into the mirror. The glass felt strangely soft and cold, pulling me in like quicksand. The last thing I saw was my reflection, terrified, frozen, as the world around me went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the mansion. I was outside, standing in the snow, staring up at the house. Everything was silent, still. The mansion was dark and lifeless again, just as it had been before I entered. But then I noticed the windows. They weren't empty. Inside, I saw the family, my family, smiling, waving at me. And in the center of the room, sitting in my place by the tree, was me. I reached out to the door, trying to scream, but no sound came out. And then the lights inside flickered off, leaving me alone in the freezing night. Some doors should never be opened. My heart raced as I stared at the darkened windows of the mansion, my reflection distorted in the icy glass. Snowflakes swirled around me, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the chill creeping into my soul. Inside, my family was gone. Or so I thought. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. I spun around, but the vast white landscape was empty. My breath fogged the air, trembling with panic. Then I felt it, a presence, cold, suffocating, and closer than ever. "Don't leave us," the voice whispered, low and guttural. I froze as I felt the icy grip on my shoulder, fingers tightening like iron claws. I bolted. The snow slowed me down, but I pushed forward, stumbling toward the tree line, desperate to escape. Behind me, I could hear it, the heavy, uneven gait of something chasing me. It wasn't running. It didn't need to. As I reached the edge of the woods, a strange sensation washed over me. The air became warm, almost suffocating, and the snow beneath my feet melted away, replaced by damp earth. I stopped, gasping for breath, and turned to look back. The mansion was gone. Instead, I stood in a dense, shadowy forest. The trees loomed high, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The air buzzed with an unnatural hum, and faint whispers echoed all around me, though no one was in sight. "Where am I?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Home," the voice replied, loud and echoing from every direction. I spun around, desperate to find a way out. But the forest seemed endless, and the shadows between the trees grew darker and darker. Then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. It was the Christmas tree from the mansion, standing alone among the trees, its ornaments glinting eerily in the dim light. Drawn to it, I stumbled forward. The closer I got, the more I noticed something was wrong. The ornaments weren't ornaments at all. They were faces, distorted, frozen in expressions of terror. And there, among them, was my own reflection, staring back at me with wide, horrified eyes. "No," I cried, backing away, but it was too late. The tree's branches stretched out like skeletal arms, wrapping around me and pulling me closer. I struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter they held me. "Stay with us," the voices whispered, overlapping, growing louder. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell, down into a darkness so deep it felt like it would never end. When I hit the ground, I found myself back in the mansion, but everything was different now. The walls were decayed, the furniture broken and rotting. The air was thick with the stench of mold and something far worse. And then I saw them, my family, now grotesque and twisted, their faces pale and their eyes hollow. They stood in a circle, motionless, staring at me. In the center of the room was a mirror, but it wasn't just any mirror. It was the same one from the fireplace, now cracked and pulsing with an unnatural energy. The reflection showed the truth. I wasn't alone. The creature, long-limbed, with glowing eyes, stood behind me, its bony fingers reaching for my neck. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The mirror began to glow brighter and brighter, the light consuming everything. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. When I opened them again, I was sitting in the same living room, back where it all began. The decorations were intact, the warmth of the fire comforting. Everything looked normal. But I wasn't alone. Seated beside me on the couch was my mother, her smile wide and empty. Across from her sat the rest of my family, their glassy eyes fixed on me. "Welcome home," they said in unison. I looked down at my hands, and my breath caught in my throat. They weren't my hands anymore. They were pale, withered, and translucent. I wasn't alive. I wasn't me anymore. The last thing I saw was the mirror across the room. My reflection was still human, still alive, pounding against the glass, screaming to be let out. But it was too late. I was part of the house now. Forever.
The Miller family had always loved Christmas. The smell of pine trees, the twinkling lights, and the sound of Christmas carols filled their home. This year, however, things were different. There was something unsettling about their Christmas Eve celebration, something the family couldn't quite put their finger on. As they gathered around the fireplace, the crackling of the fire provided warmth against the biting cold of the night. The table was set with Christmas dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce, the perfect meal for a perfect Christmas. But in the back of their minds, they couldn't shake the eerie feeling that they weren't alone. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, even though you were surrounded by the ones you love? As the clock ticked closer to midnight, an unsettling silence fell over the room. The Christmas tree twinkled, casting long shadows across the room. Suddenly, the lights flickered and dimmed, plunging the room into darkness for a moment. The family froze, their hearts racing. Was it a power outage, or something more sinister? When the lights returned, the air felt different, heavier. A faint whisper echoed through the house. A cold draft brushed past them, and the hairs on their necks stood up. Everyone looked at one another, trying to make sense of the strange sensation. What was that? Was it just the wind, or was something else here with them? Their questions were answered moments later. As the clock struck midnight, the front door creaked open, despite no one being near it. Slowly, a figure stepped into the room, silhouetted by the moonlight pouring through the window. The family turned towards the door, their faces pale with fear. The figure was tall, draped in tattered, snow-covered clothes, and its face, barely visible beneath the hood, was unnaturally pale. It moved slowly, its footsteps making no sound, as if it was floating. And then it spoke, its voice deep and gravelly. "Merry Christmas." The words hung in the air, sending a chill down everyone's spine. But what was more terrifying was the way it spoke. There was something wrong about it. Something otherworldly. The family tried to speak, but the words caught in their throats. The figure reached into its coat and pulled out a small blood-stained ornament, placing it on the mantel. It was a tiny, delicate angel, its wings broken, its face twisted into a grotesque smile. What did this mean? Who was this person? What did they want? Aunt Claire, the eldest of the family, stepped forward, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." The room fell silent. The family exchanged confused glances. The ghost continued, "I am here to remind you of the sins you have forgotten, the ones you have buried deep in your hearts. Tonight, I will show you the cost of ignoring the past." Suddenly, the walls around them seemed to shift. The house, which had once felt like home, now seemed like a maze. The floorboards creaked as if they were alive, and the air turned freezing cold. Snow began to fall inside, as though the very house had opened to the outside world. Then the room began to transform. The family found themselves standing in the same living room, but it looked different. Older, worn down, the fire was no longer burning, and the room was covered in a layer of dust. But that wasn't the worst part. In the corner, there was a broken crib. The crib that had once belonged to the Miller family's baby, who had mysteriously vanished many years ago. The ghostly figure pointed toward it, and the room seemed to darken even further. "Do you remember her? Do you remember what you did?" The family gasped. The crib, now empty, seemed to echo with the cries of a child long gone. The image of their lost baby, whose disappearance had haunted them for years, came back in full force. The ghost continued, "You thought the past could be forgotten. But tonight, I will show you what happens when you try to erase the truth." Suddenly, the family was no longer in the present day. They were back in time, reliving the night their baby disappeared. They saw themselves, their faces filled with guilt and fear. They had never spoken of it again, not after they found the crib empty. But deep inside, they knew they had failed. They had never sought help, never looked for the truth. They had buried the memory in the hopes that it would never resurface. But the ghost of Christmas past knew better. The family was forced to face the consequences of their actions. And just as quickly as the vision began, it vanished, leaving the family standing in the living room, their hearts heavy with regret. The ghost spoke once more. "The past always catches up with you, no matter how hard you try to hide it. You cannot escape the consequences of your choices." With that, the figure slowly faded into the darkness, leaving the family in stunned silence. The house was silent once more, but the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. The family knew that they could never forget what they had seen, what they had ignored. The past, it seemed, would always find a way to surface, especially when least expected it. What lesson does this story teach us? It's simple. You can't bury your past. The ghosts of your mistakes will always come back to haunt you. The truth will find its way to the surface, no matter how much you try to hide it. If you think you can ignore the truth, think again. Don't let your past come back to haunt you like the Millers. If you're intrigued by the darkness that lies hidden in plain sight, like, share, and subscribe to uncover more chilling tales. What are your thoughts on the Miller family's story? Leave a comment and let us know.
It was Christmas Eve, and the air was filled with the festive hum of carolers, laughter, and the scent of freshly baked cookies. The snow fell lightly over the picturesque town of Cedar Pines, where every house on Evergreen Lane was aglow with twinkling lights and decorated wreaths. In the center of it all stood the Grand Harper Estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion that hosted the town's most awaited Christmas party every year. The Harper family was known for their lavish celebrations, and tonight was no exception. The grand hall was decked in glittering ornaments. A towering Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, and the air buzzed with joy as guests mingled. But amidst the cheer, there was an undercurrent of unease, something that didn't belong, though no one could quite place it. I, James Callahan, a private investigator, had been invited to the party, though not as a guest. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the matriarch, had hired me discreetly a week ago. She suspected someone in her family was hiding a dangerous secret, though she wouldn't reveal what. As the clock struck 11, the party was in full swing. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and carolers sang outside. But then, a blood-curdling scream shattered the joyous atmosphere. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the staircase, where a young woman stood trembling, her face pale as snow. It was Clara Harper, Evelyn's youngest granddaughter. "He's dead," she shrieked, pointing up the stairs. Chaos erupted. Guests rushed to see what had happened, and I pushed through the crowd, my heart pounding. On the landing of the grand staircase lay a man in a crimson robe. Evelyn's eldest son, Charles Harper. His body was twisted unnaturally, his eyes wide open in shock. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the pristine white carpet. I crouched beside the body, my instincts kicking in. His throat had been slashed cleanly, the kind of precision that suggested intent rather than a crime of passion. Someone had murdered Charles Harper. The police were called, but with the snowstorm intensifying, their arrival was delayed. Evelyn Harper, pale and shaken, turned to me. "You must find out who did this, Mr. Callahan," she whispered, "before the night is over." I nodded, scanning the room. The guests were still gathered, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. Whoever had done this was still here, hiding in plain sight. The first clue came quickly. Near the body, tucked partially under the carpet, I found a strange object. A Christmas ornament, shattered and stained with blood. It was shaped like a snowflake, sharp and jagged at the edges. Could it have been the weapon? But there was more. The trail of blood led away from the body, up another set of stairs to the attic. I decided to follow it, against Evelyn's protests. The attic was cold, the air heavy with dust, and the faint scent of pine. It was an odd mix of festive decorations and forgotten junk, old photographs, broken furniture, and boxes labeled Christmas, 1947. In the corner, I spotted a figure, a man crouched low, his hands trembling. It was Thomas Harper, Charles's younger brother. His face was pale, and his hands were smeared with blood. "Thomas," I said firmly, stepping closer, "what are you doing up here?" I didn't kill him," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I found him like that, and I panicked. I swear." Before I could press further, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my flashlight flickering as a chilling draft swept through the attic. "Who's there?" I called out. No response. But then, faintly, I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost melodic, like someone humming a Christmas carol. It came from the shadows, growing louder and closer. Thomas bolted, shoving past me and racing down the stairs. I hesitated, torn between following him and investigating the sound. Then I saw it, a figure in the corner, shrouded in darkness. It moved toward me, slow and deliberate. "James," it whispered, its voice cold and unnatural. I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hand. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. Returning to the grand hall, I found the guests in a frenzy. Another scream had echoed through the house. This time, the victim was Clara, the young woman who had first discovered Charles. She was found in the library, slumped over an armchair, her neck bruised as if she'd been strangled. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Evelyn demanded answers, and the family members began accusing one another. But I knew the truth was more sinister. Examining Clara's body, I found a scrap of paper clenched in her hand. It was a fragment of an old letter dated December 24th, 1947. The words were faded, but one line stood out. "We'll pay for what we did that Christmas. The blood is on our hands." As I pieced the puzzle together, a chilling realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a murder, it was a reckoning. I confronted Evelyn in her study, the letter clutched in my hand. "What happened in 1947, Mrs. Harper?" I demanded. Her face turned ashen. "That Christmas, it was a mistake. We were young, foolish. We thought it was harmless." "What was harmless?" "A seance," she whispered, "to contact the spirits of Christmas past. But something went wrong. A man died, my brother. And now," her voice broke, "now they've come for us." Before I could respond, the lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. Evelyn screamed, but her voice was cut off abruptly. When the lights returned, she was gone. The study was empty, save for the shattered mirror on the wall. In its cracked surface, I saw not my own reflection, but the ghostly image of the Harper family, lifeless, pale, and staring back at me. A cold voice whispered in my ear, "Merry Christmas, James." The whisper echoed in my ear, cold and hollow. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. The broken mirror shimmered faintly in the dim light, as if mocking me. My breath misted in the frigid air, and I realized the temperature had dropped drastically. Evelyn Harper was gone, but the study felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy I couldn't explain. I stared at the shattered mirror again, the ghostly figures of the Harper family lingering in its fractured surface. Their lifeless eyes bore into mine. And then they moved. The figures in the mirror didn't reflect my movements. They acted on their own. Evelyn's ghostly hand reached forward, pressing against the glass, and her lips moved silently. I leaned closer, trying to decipher her words. "Run." The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't from the mirror. It was behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening as the sensation of cold breath brushed the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned, expecting to see another figure, another ghostly apparition, or perhaps the murderer. But there was nothing. The door slammed shut on its own, locking me inside the study. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to focus. The broken mirror had to mean something. I grabbed a shard of glass, careful not to cut myself, and inspected it. The reflection showed the study as it was. But in the corner, near Evelyn's desk, I saw something that wasn't there in reality. A trapdoor. I dropped the shard and rushed to the desk, pushing aside papers and an old lamp until I found the hidden latch. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The air grew colder as I descended, the silence broken only by the creak of the wooden steps beneath my weight. The space smelled damp and metallic, like rusted iron in decay. I flicked on my flashlight, its weak beam barely piercing the gloom. At the bottom of the stairs was a cavernous room, lined with old Christmas decorations, dusty wreaths, cracked ornaments, and a rusted sleigh. But in the center of the room was what truly caught my attention, a massive stone altar, stained with something dark and dried. On the altar was a photo, yellowed with age. It was the Harper family, smiling brightly in front of a Christmas tree. But scrawled across their faces in red ink, or was it blood? Were the words, "You invited us." A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped closer. Something crunched underfoot, and I looked down to see bones, small ones, animal perhaps, though their sharp edges made me doubt it. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows. I turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. A figure emerged from the darkness, hunched and unnatural, its limbs elongated and twisted. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. "Welcome, James," it rasped, its voice a blend of several tones, male, female, childlike, and monstrous. "You've finally found the truth." What are you?" I stammered, stepping back. It tilted its head, almost amused. "I am the shadow of their sins, the echoes of that fateful Christmas in 1947, when they called upon powers they did not understand." I glanced at the altar, the photo, the ominous message. "You're here for revenge." The creature chuckled, a sound that made my stomach twist. Revenge. No, punishment. Before I could react, it lunged. I stumbled backward, the flashlight clattering to the ground. Darkness consumed the room as I scrambled to my feet, the creature's guttural breaths growing closer. Blindly, I felt along the walls, my fingers brushing against cold stone and rusted metal. My hand closed around something, a switch. Without thinking, I pulled it. The room flooded with red light, revealing the full extent of the horrors around me. The walls were covered in markings, symbols etched deep into the stone. They glowed faintly, pulsating with energy. And in the corner, chained and motionless, were the spectral forms of the Harper family. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terror, their eyes hollow and lifeless. "You can't save them," the creature hissed, circling me now. "Their debt is paid. But you still have a choice. What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cavern. "Join me," it whispered, its voice soft and seductive now. "Take their place, and I will let you leave. Refuse, and you will perish here, forgotten, just like them. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me as the creature loomed closer. My mind raced. I couldn't trust it, but I also couldn't see a way out. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse faster, their glow intensifying. Then I saw it, a faint shimmer near the altar, like a doorway flickering in and out of existence. Could it be an escape? The creature noticed my gaze and snarled. That path is not for you. I had seconds to decide. Option 1. I could surrender, taking the Harper family's place and potentially ending the curse. Option 2. I could make a run for the shimmering doorway, risking everything. I took a deep breath and made my choice. As I moved, the creature roared, its form shifting and expanding, filling the room with shadows. The ground shook, the walls cracked, and the red light flickered violently. But I didn't stop. The last thing I heard before crossing the threshold was its voice, a chilling promise that would haunt me forever. You can't escape. I will find you. I plunged forward, my heart pounding in my chest as the red light dimmed behind me. The shimmering doorway, my only hope, pulled me in like a vortex. But the creature's voice echoed in my mind, the words like icy tendrils wrapping around my thoughts. You can't escape. I will find you. The world around me twisted, distorting like melting wax. The coldness that had gripped the basement seeped into my bones, but this new place, this new reality, was something far worse. It was a place of darkness, a void that seemed to stretch forever, suffocating in its silence. The doorway vanished behind me, leaving me in absolute blackness. I felt the walls pressing in, a crushing weight, as though the air itself was alive and closing in on me. I tried to move, but every step I took felt like wading through quicksand, my feet dragging, my body heavy. Then came the whispers, low at first, like the wind rustling through dead leaves, but they grew louder, more urgent. James, James, you cannot outrun your fate. I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was different now, deeper, familiar. It sounded like my own. Suddenly, a burst of light flickered ahead, illuminating a scene that sent a jolt of terror through me. There, in the center of the room, stood the Harper family, alive. But their eyes were empty, hollow, and they stared directly at me, as though waiting for something. You should never have come here, Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible, her lips curling into a smile that didn't belong. The others followed suit, each of them mouthing the same words over and over, a twisted chorus. You should never have come here. My heart raced. I tried to back away, but the ground beneath me seemed to buckle and twist, pulling me forward. My legs wouldn't move, couldn't move. I was stuck, paralyzed by an unseen force. The walls of the room closed in, and the shadows around me stretched and writhed, becoming figures, familiar figures, shifting in and out of the light. The Harper family had been murdered here. I knew that, but something darker had happened. Something beyond death. I saw myself in the mirror, standing among them. But it wasn't me, not entirely. My reflection was distorted, twisted, faded. It grinned at me, a malicious, knowing grin. You've become part of the story, the reflection sneered. Just like them. Panic gripped me. I screamed for help, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice, bouncing off the walls, growing louder, louder. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, shifting and circling like hungry vultures. I could hear their whispers now. Two soft, guttural voices mingling with my own thoughts, mocking, taunting, coaxing. Come, join us. Join the endless Christmas night. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick with their voices, pulling at my very soul. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. And then I saw it, the trapdoor. It was there, the same trapdoor from the basement. But it was different now. It wasn't just a way out. It was a doorway into something far worse, a place where time no longer mattered, a place where I would be trapped forever, alongside the Harper family and whatever horrors lurked in the shadows. I reached for it. But as my hand touched the cold metal, a scream tore through the room, a sound so agonizing, so primal, that it felt like the earth itself was crying. I pulled my hand away. The door was closing, fading. I turned, my eyes scanning the room for any escape, but the walls were closing in. The last thing I saw was the twisted reflection of myself, grinning. And then there was nothing, only darkness. The darkness was suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The cold clung to me like a shroud, weighing me down. My heart hammered in my chest, but there was no escape. I was trapped. No walls, no floor, just the endless void. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, trying to force my mind to calm down. But the whispers never stopped. They were everywhere, inside me. My thoughts twisted into their voice, mocking me, calling me by my name, begging me to stay. "Join us, James," they hissed. "You can never leave. You were always meant to be here." The reflection in the mirror flashed before my eyes again. The twisted, grinning version of myself. It wasn't just a mirror. It was a warning. A curse. A part of the house itself. I stumbled forward, feeling the weight of the curse press on me from all sides. But then, through the blackness, I saw a faint light, a glimmer in the distance. It beckoned. With all my strength, I moved toward it, each step growing harder than the last, the shadows clinging to my legs, trying to drag me back. But I couldn't stop. I had to get out. As I reached the light, it brightened, revealing a figure standing in the center, a silhouette of someone familiar. It was Evelyn. Her eyes, once hollow, now gleamed with an eerie light. She stepped forward, her smile sweet, almost kind. "You made it," she said softly, her voice dripping with something I couldn't quite place. But something was wrong. The smile, the warmth, it was all wrong. "You shouldn't have come." The moment the words left her lips, the world around me shattered. The light exploded, and the ground beneath me gave way. I fell. Down into an abyss, the screams of the Harper family and the monster's laughter ringing in my ears, drowning out all else. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was my own reflection, grinning, and then silence.